Okay, today we're watching how Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK are secretly forming one global superpower, CANZUK. Oh, that's a big secret. Everybody knows it now. Almost 5 million people have watched this video. But yeah, let's watch and see what CANZUK is. And yeah, let's watch.
This is the country of Cambodia. It is a small to mid-sized country with a population of just over 15 million people and is located in the southern portion of the Indochina Peninsula in Southeast Asia. Now, during most of the 20th century, Cambodia was an extremely poor and relatively weak country in regards to its economy and military. In fact, in 1998, after 3 consecutive years of economic contraction, the country had a GDP per capita of just $269, making it one of the poorest countries on the planet. You see, because Cambodia was a poor and somewhat small country, it gave them no sway on the global stage in regards to trade, politics, military, and economics. So that was why the country decided to try something different. In 1961, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or simply ASEAN, was created by Thailand, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Essentially, this was a union created to help accelerate economic growth, social progress, and cultural development in the region, while also helping promote regional peace, while giving these—
Honestly, I think if I was a leader, a country leader, the biggest thing to be included into like politics and military, or agreements and all that, you have to develop a big nuclear bomb. Once you have a nuclear bomb, they take you serious. Because look at Kim Jong-un, South Korea or North Korea. It's a poor country. There's literally just like treats his own people like slaves, and like it's all like that. It's not really that. It's not really that strong, but it's feared. Why? Nuclear bombs. He's a war maniac. Of course, everybody's gonna take him serious. So if a country like Cambodia had nuclear bombs, hell yeah, they'd be like, okay, let's talk politics. Please don't nuke. Don't come into this agreement with us so we don't use the how politics goes.
Smaller nations a much larger say on the global stage. Now, also a side note is that this was also formed out of a fear of growing communist regimes in nearby countries, such as China, but I will leave that for another video. But in a sense, this new Southeast Asian Union allowed for small and poor countries to gain political and economic independence from nearby superpowers. And over the next several decades, other Southeast Asian nations would join, such as Indonesia, Singapore, Brunei, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And all along the way, this new union strengthened the economies of each one of these nations, while also proving to be a somewhat unified political entity, as they showed a unified response to many political threats and wars over the last 60 years. And so, that is why in 1999, Cambodia decided to join this new political union. And since then, Cambodia has seen its economy move from a level of extreme poverty to that of a developing nation, albeit still a relatively poor and small nation on its own. However,
honestly, a lot of people are gonna disagree with me, but I don't really like groups. I don't like getting together and forming alliances or whatever, because things happen when you leave countries. I don't like that. It's leaving is the biggest problem with alliances like these. It's I don't know how to explain this. It's just I just don't like treaty groups like these. Yeah, it boosts the economy. Everybody is happy for that, at that time. But at what cost? There's just always something. I think I'll tell you more about what I think.
The union has seen its economic influence grow over the past decade. In fact, this union now has between the 5th and 7th largest amount of economic influence in the entire world, depending on what metric you use. And if that is what a collection of somewhat poor Southeast Asian nations could do, imagine what would happen if 4 very wealthy nations were to form a new union of their own. A union that would
Not a
act in
good
a similar
idea.
way with unified global plans for their militaries, economies, politics, trade, and even citizenship. That's why right now we could be seeing the creation of a new global force right before our very eyes. In the early 1800s, New Zealand was a largely unpopulated series of islands, with the exception of the Maori natives. Australia had just a few thousand British settlers, 40% of which were prisoners, and Canada was filled with a few 100,000 British and French loyalists that simply did not want to live in America after the Revolutionary War. But then, during the 1800s, these three young nations would begin to go through a massive change. Within the following decades, they slowly began to become more populated, wealthy, and would eventually become part of the Commonwealth of countries under the British Empire. Now, these three nations at the time were not viewed as the most valuable possessions of the British Empire. India, for example, had over 200 million people within its borders, and was one of the largest economies in the world while being ruled by the British. This led to India
India's
being
always
named the jewel
been
of the
big.
crown. There were also some other nations that were in a more valuable geographical location for the British. Egypt, along with parts of China and Indonesia, were viewed as more valuable colonies of the British Empire at the time due to their proximity
Bruh.
to trade routes, trade partners,
The pharaohs
and
would be
strategic
disappointed in
touristic
Egypt for
locations.
being
But over the next
taken over by
100
the
years, the
British.
British Empire would begin to fall, as virtually every country that was previously under British rule soon declared their own independence and moved away from the enforced British culture.
See, that's
Well,
the
that was
problem.
except
They all want to
for a
leave.
few. You see, even after declaring independence from Britain, many of these nations kept their British traditions and even made their own political association called the Commonwealth of Nations. And three of these nations that have kept a lot of their old British traditions are Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. You see, even though each one of these countries has their own unique culture, they are quite similar in a sense where if you were to take someone from a city like Sydney, Australia, and plop them down into a city like Toronto, their daily life, the laws they live under, and their social norms wouldn't be that different. And that point will become very important in just a minute. So let's...
Really? I don't think it's that. How would it... If I go to another country right now, I know Americans do a lot of dumb stuff when they're in other countries. Like, assuming I'm a normal person, it shouldn't be that hard to live in another country. With laws, at least. Because, you know, a lot of... If you're not carrying weed on you or any of that. I think most foreign nations have light punishments for like crimes. I think I'd fit in completely. But America is just crazy because you get people who sell drugs and all that 20 years. You're like, what? But in foreign nations, you could try to buy your
Fast
way
forward
out.
to something recent, Brexit. On January 31st of 2020, the United Kingdom officially ratified an agreement to leave the European Union. Now, before Brexit, on paper, the EU had the second largest amount of economic influence in the world behind the United States and slightly ahead of China. But the UK was the second largest economy in the European Union behind Germany, so when the UK decided to leave, the European Union fell behind China in terms of global economic influence. But now there is a new union being proposed by some of the top political leaders in the countries of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. They're proposing
Why
a
would
new
they do
union
that?
called
You just left.
CANZUK. Now, this proposed
Another
union is
one. Why
endorsed
would
by the
you
Prime
join?
Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Aaron O'Toole, and a multitude of senators and MPs from Australia and New Zealand. So that brings up a few questions. What is this union and what are the ramifications for it on the global scale? Well, the idea is to form a union that would increase trade, foreign policy cooperation, military cooperation, and mobility of citizens between these nations. Essentially, on a global scale, these four countries would try to act more as one bigger nation versus four smaller ones. So the ramifications of this could be massive. Out of these four countries, the UK has the largest economy and the sixth largest economy in the world.
Well, you have to think about this. One of them is going to want more power over the others, obviously. That's just because it's like UK. Definitely, they're going to want to be in power over all the other ones. I could see this from miles away. Like, why Yeah, what I just said is true. The UK will want more power because they have the most influence. First of all, it's like when you're doing group work, and then the rest of the group is just you're like, okay, I know more than these guys, so you're gonna be the leader. You're gonna tell them what to do, and I guess boss them around a little bit. So I'm not really a big fan of CANZUK. It doesn't seem like, and things happen. Just things happen. All these treaties, all these, like, I think they're better off by themselves, honestly. I don't know. You guys could argue differently.
Is
but
next,
that's
having
my
the 10th
strong
largest
opinion.
economy in the world. Australia is close behind with the 14th largest economy, and New Zealand is a distant 51st in terms of size of its economy, largely due to its small population. Now, when you take into account the size of these economies, along with general economic and political influence, then this new proposed union would likely become the second most powerful union in the world behind the EU. And this would also make it the fourth largest economic engine in the world, just behind China. Now, this union would also have the fifth strongest military force in the world, and it would control the largest amount of land and resources on Earth as well. So undoubtedly, if this union were to happen, then we would immediately see a new superpower take its place on the globe.
Wait, look at how funny this is. Africa is bigger than all these combined. Wow. Imagine if this whole Africa plus Russia or every European country that's over there, that'd be a cool union to see. But the other ones, this is literally all the places the UK had before. It's like you're trying to do it again. That's so funny.
Stage. And one thing that might make this union act more as one singular cohesive nation than other unions like the European Union is this. As I already mentioned before, these countries are very similar in terms of their governments, culture, quality of life, healthcare, wealth, and even language. In fact, these are four of the most similar nations in the world. But yet, if you were to take a look at the European Union, you have 27 different countries, 24 different official languages, and completely different
English is the main one.
And cultures. So the EU on its surface has always been more about trade and mobility, yet CANZUK would likely be more than that. If you were to take a look at the voting records at the United Nations, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the UK almost always vote in the same way, yet the countries in the European Union are almost never completely unified in their votes. And that's one of the reasons why this might be a union that we have never really seen before. One where four separate countries could have all of the benefits of a union like the European Union, but also be an order of magnitude more cohesive than any other union in history. Now, to this point, I've only really mentioned how powerful this union could be, but there are a few major things that are worth noting before we move forward. One of which is that a key reason as to why some politicians in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada want this union to go forward is to simply get off of China. You see, I've mentioned in previous videos about how China is essentially trying to control pretty much everything from ports to manufacturing to trade. China also has a much different government, laws, and culture than the CANZUK countries. And that is one of the reasons why the former Conservative Party of Canada leader Andrew Scheer became outspoken about the CANZUK deal. He said a few years ago,
Bro, yeah, China is a bit scary. Like, how much all the stuff around me is probably made from China. I know that right there, that light right there is definitely made from China. So, if China's like, if you're on bad terms with China, yeah, that's just not a good look for your country. But if these guys want to match China, why couldn't you just stay in the European Union? It was already above China. So I find that pretty funny. Even if they get together, even if these countries come together as one, there's still singular countries that are bigger than this. Come on, man. I don't know. I think being solo in this situation would be good, especially now that UK is kind of independent from the European Union, so they should take advantage of that and not go back into another treaty.
A trade deal with those countries. Australia, New Zealand, and the UK have a similar basis of law, they have a common democratic system, they have the same types of legislation and regulations around investment and trade. Those are the types of things we don't enjoy with China. So, in theory, if a CANZUK deal could help Canada and the rest of the CANZUK countries get off of the control of Chinese trade and manufacturing, then many politicians and the public in CANZUK countries would likely support this deal. And there have also been many politicians come out and say that this deal would help get off Middle Eastern and Russian oil, which is also viewed as a positive for the CANZUK nations as well. Now, so far there has been overwhelming public support in each one of these countries, as the UK polls show 68% in favor of CANZUK, Australia shows 73% support, Canada is at 76%.
Bruh, look at that. Of course New Zealand has 82% because they're the smaller country. They want to benefit off the bigger nations. I'm not surprised. The UK will, even if this gets together, you know the UK is going to split in the end. Those guys are like, they always do that. It's like little snakes. They always want to part away when something isn't looking too good in their favor. Not even trying to be offensive.
And New Zealand is at 82%. Now that brings up the question, with such overwhelming support for this new union, why hasn't this union happened yet? Well, one of the reasons is that the benefits of this union might not be as great as they seem. Sure, there would be some surefire upside things, like being able to work or live in any of these countries without needing a permit. There would also be a political and militaristic union, which would certainly be an upside as well. But one of the core touted benefits, trade, might be a lot more difficult than some people think. And to find the reason as to why this is, all we have to do is look at a map. Do you notice any potential problems with having trade deals between these four countries? Well, as you might have noticed, apart from New Zealand and Australia, these nations are pretty much on opposite sides of the planet from one another. In fact, the cities of Perth, Australia and Toronto, Canada are almost exactly on opposite sides of the planet. And the same goes for the cities of Southland, New Zealand and London, England. All this means is that trade between these four nations may not pick up that much, even if a favorable trade deal were to be in place. But that doesn't mean that an increase in trade wouldn't happen at all. And this is simply due to the fact that Canada and Australia are big, very big. You see, even though the distance between Toronto and Perth is a whopping 18,100 kilometers, or nearly half the circumference of the Earth, the distance between the Port of Vancouver and Brisbane is only about 11,800 kilometers, which is actually a fairly reasonable distance.
That's only 4 hours away.
And from Canada's perspective, they could reasonably up their trade volume with Australia while downing their trade volume with China. This is because on average, it takes a ship from China 22 days to reach the Port of Vancouver, yet it takes about 27 days for a ship to travel from Australia to the Port of Vancouver. A difference of only about 5 days would not mean that much when transporting large bulk resources from country to country. And when you also take into account that eastern provinces of Canada, like Nova Scotia, are only about 4,600 kilometers away from London, England, that could mean that a trade deal between Canada and the UK would have a lot more upside than critics think. In fact, the trade routes which would likely be economically unviable for a CANZUK deal would be trade between the UK and either Australia or New Zealand. So now that brings up the question, how likely is it that this union will actually happen? And well, it really depends.
10%.
As mentioned earlier, Boris Johnson is already a fan of this union. The Conservative Party of Canada, who could possibly win the next election, is for this union as well. Scott Morrison, who is the Prime Minister of Australia, was actually against this union 2 years ago, but has become a lot more open to this agreement in the last few months, but doesn't necessarily want to include Canada yet. And lastly, the former leader of the opposition, or the National Party of New Zealand, Simon Bridges, has also voiced his support for this potential union as well. So all in all, what is the likelihood of CANZUK actually happening? Well, it's tough to say. Even though there is growing public support for this union, it has not garnered quite enough political support yet. But considering that enough major political parties in all of these countries support CANZUK, it is quite possible that if the stars align, then sometime within the next decade, we could see the creation of one of the most cohesive and powerful unions in the world.
China's gonna be number one in a decade.
What are your thoughts on CANZUK? Do you think it'll happen? And if it does, what do you think the global ramifications of it would be? Let me know.
I just gave you my complete, honest opinion on this. CANZUK is trash. It just sounds like like something a kid would plan out. Okay, 4 nations get together because they all speak the same languages, blah blah blah. That's like all the Arab nations just like I don't know, coming together and forming alliances because they're Arab, or every African country coming together just because they're all African. That's a funny idea. Yeah, China. Not a lot of countries are gonna stop China, bro. China's been growing I don't know, bro. Those guys just producing. My shirt, it says made in China. It literally had made in China, bro. I don't know what's not made in China anymore. That's crazy. But yeah, thanks for watching and have a nice day.